Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HGM here. You know, lately there's been a lot of discussion among players in the ESO community, and it has to do with a potential new feature that some players would like to see get added to the game. This feature would give players the ability to play through a group dungeon while soloing in order to see the story and experience the lore behind that dungeon, while also completely getting rid of their options for loot or experience from the same dungeon. Some people are calling this idea solo story mode, just like we have a normal mode and a veteran mode for any ESO dungeon. Now I understand that right off the bat, the very idea of a story mode getting added into ESO's group dungeons might make some of you a little bit uncomfortable. You might not like the idea, and I definitely understand, but this feature would be pretty interesting for a lot of players on the other side of the fence as well. And since I do cover ESO on this channel, and I do create a fair bit of solo builds for ESO, I thought this might be a good discussion to have right here, right now. So in this video, I want to look at both sides of the argument for a solo story mode being added to ESO. Let's jump into it. So first off, let's talk about where this idea really came from. Now, I don't think it's a new idea. Threads on the ESO forums have requested something similar to this idea for a long time. But after the recent global reveal event for ESO Skyrim, or officially it's called the Greymoor chapter, I guess, there was this huge uptick in forum threads regarding this topic. I think there's a good reason for this. When Rich was describing the Q1 dungeon DLCs, the Harrowstorm DLC dungeons, he mentioned something to the effect that they were really getting into the story for this year, 2020, and that storyline was going to be more integrated, more important in those dungeons, more than any dungeon DLC before. The story was really going to be tied into those DLC dungeons, where they're kicking off that Greymoor chapter storyline. So what would that mean? Well, for some, it doesn't really mean much. I mean, some players just like grinding dungeons for gear, for achievements, for motifs, and they like the challenge maybe of the veteran hard mode boss. For them, nothing really changes. Well, wow, there's more story now? Cool, whatever, I'm just gonna click through it, click, and I'm gonna forget about it eventually. But for those that play ESO more for its story and the lore and the characters, there's now maybe a greater fear of missing out on key story elements, because for whatever reason, these players don't enjoy grouping up for dungeons, and for them, the idea of missing out on those brand new story elements or characters, that again, these will be more important and connected to the main story chapter than ever before, and that's according to Rich. The thought of that is just a little bit frustrating for them. So the discussion is back, I think hotter than ever before. Should there be a solo story mode added to group dungeons? Before we dive further into this discussion, I want to briefly talk about the Elder Scrolls Online and how it's different from any other MMO really ever. And it's not so much that the game itself is different from any other MMO. All MMOs have similar elements. I mean, there's leveling up, there's skills, there's abilities, there's gear, crafting, guilds, quests, raids, or trials as we call them here in ESO. None of this formula has really changed in the 20 plus years that I've been playing MMOs. Yeah, that's right, I flexed a little bit there. But what I think is significantly different is ESO's community itself. A large percentage of players that play ESO are not really MMO fans or MMO players per se. They're test players. They're fans of the Elder Scrolls series of games, you know, Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind. They are actually single-player people who decided to branch out a little bit because they love the Elder Scrolls. They love the series so much and they just wanted more of it. For those people, ESO can fill in a gap for them because after you played through Skyrim 10 times on 5 different devices, there's really nothing else left in the series besides the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, I actually fit into both camps a little bit. I think there are other people like me as well. Like I mentioned before, MMOs were some of the first games I played back when I was a teenager, and I was all about grinding gear and leveling up and raiding. But then I took a break from MMOs for a while, and I started getting into the Elder Scrolls single-player titles like Skyrim and Oblivion. So I really like both aspects of ESO. I like the grinding and the progression. I like PvE, I like PvP. But I also like just exploring the world. I like chatting with NPCs and quest lines, and I like seeing the lore and the history of the universe unfold before me. So there are players like me that do a bit of everything, but I also recognize that not everyone is like me. Some players just like the MMO side of things, and they want that PvE raid, or they want only PvP. Then there are other players, those single player people, that they only like the lore and the questing, maybe crafting and housing. Maybe they join a few guilds for a bit of the social element, but they're not really into the group content, either PvE or PvP. That's just not their thing. And I think this is where ESO is special. Yes, you do have plenty of MMO players that focus only on those elements of the game, you know, the end game and the min-maxing, and that's totally fine. But then you also have this other big section of players who they're not MMO players at all. They're simply fans of the Elder Scrolls series, and they're playing ESO to further explore that world, and that's fine too. You know, the ESO developers created this catchphrase that's kind of stuck around for a long time, and that's this idea of play as you want. Join the Elder Scrolls Online and you can play as you want. Well, if you've played this game for a while, you know that's not necessarily true all the time. There are certain things you can and cannot do based on your level, based on your gear, your DPS in this game. But I think the spirit of that idea is still true. I think that even the developers realize that they have a huge audience of single-player people interested in ESO, and that play as you want is actually an amazing marketing strategy to get those people to jump into ESO for the first time. Basically, the developers have said to those test fans, hey, look over here. We have quests too. We have stories too. You can craft, you can explore, you can join a guild, you can even get into endgame PvE or PvP. You can play as you want. And that idea is important because the Elder Scrolls series has such a huge single-player fan base. Tapping into those single-player people is what will ultimately keep the game going for years to come. So this is where some of you probably are going to get angry at me, because I'm going to say that you can play ESO as a strict MMO, and that's fine for you. But if somebody else wants to play ESO more as a single-player RPG, but with some social elements like trading and crafting and guilds mixed in, they should be able to do that too. So I'm saying yes, solo gameplay needs to be a part of ESO, and it needs to be supported more than it is right now. Hang on, don't get too mad yet. There are limits, I think, to this. There should be limits to soloing in an MMORPG. So no, I don't think there should be a solo trial mode. To me, that seems silly. It's like riding It's a Small World at Disneyland. Everything inside is a trial monster that just smiles and waves at you. No, that's ridiculous. Trials should be hard and they should require a group. We also already have a single-player trial basically in Veteran Maelstrom Arena, though I would love to see new single-player arenas added to the game as well. But this idea of solo mode for group dungeons, it's really appealing to me, and ZeniMax, if you're listening, this is a huge opportunity to make money. Yes, ZOS can get a massive increase in player interest to buy those dungeon DLCs that they release not once, but 2 times every year for the dungeon packs. And they can increase ESO's lifespan at the same time by enabling some type of story mode for those dungeons. Why? I mean, just look at what some people have already said much more eloquently than myself on the ESO forums, on numerous threads regarding this idea. There are just many players that say they will flat out never buy a dungeon DLC no matter what, because they just won't play it. All these players do is they buy the chapter, maybe they buy the story DLC in quarter 4, but that's it. They only play half the content that gets released every year. These people are not interested in grouping up for dungeons for whatever reason. I mean, maybe they got burned by a dungeon group too many times. You know, players rush through the quest, or maybe they kick you out if they think your DPS may be too low, and that's just kind of sad. What's also sad is that dungeons in this game are so amazing and beautiful, and the stories are so great in some of these. It's sad that some of the people who would enjoy them, maybe the most of all, will actually never play them. You know, this is partly the reason why I started creating solo builds here on the channel. Yes, sometimes I just needed to farm a dungeon set for like a PvP build, but many times I would just stick around a dungeon exploring all of it. I mean, the environment, locations, the NPCs, the monsters, the voice acting, it's all so good, and it's already done. I mean, think about it. This is work that's already done that might only be reaching a fraction of the player base. All you'd have to do is package it in a way that makes it more accessible to single player people, and I think you'll make a lot more money, and you'll make a lot of players happy. So how do you create a dungeon story mode without disincentivizing group play? Well, like I said before, I don't think a story mode takes away from people grouping up at all. It won't subtract from the group queue, simply because what we're trying to do is just reach players who would never be in the group queue anyway. Again, these are single player people doing single player things in an MMO. They aren't in the group queue at all. The playstyles don't mix, but we want to find a way for them to share the same content, and I think we can do that with some limitations. So first, let's talk about loot. A story mode would have no loot, period. No gold, no crafting materials, no treasure chests, nothing. Killing enemies or doing the quest would give you no experience as well. So if you want the loot, if you want some experience, you have to join the group. Or you could check out one of my amazing solo dungeon builds that can solo veteran ranked dungeons with ease. Am I right, YouTube? But seriously, no loot for a story mode makes sense to me. I think it would be cool to have maybe separate story achievements though for collectors who, let's say they do all the base game stories in an alliance, or maybe all the dungeon stories in one DLC. You could get a story mode achievement. Maybe then you could purchase like a unique housing item or something like that, but nothing really more than that. Second, let's talk about enemies. You still need enemies to combat, even in story mode. I mean, just think about it. Most of the dungeon quest lines have you defeat a set of enemies, a faction, a group. There's really no way around that. You wouldn't just take all the enemies out and leave it with just story NPCs and nothing else. That doesn't make sense. Also, that would take a lot more work adjusting the zone for the story mode. So leave all the enemies in the dungeon, but just scale their damage and their health more appropriately for single players. If you think about it, we already have similar health and damage scaling going from normal dungeon mode to veteran dungeon mode. Story mode would just then be a step down from normal mode. Let's say a basic enemy in veteran mode has 200,000 HP. At normal mode, they have maybe 100,000 HP, and in story mode, they have around 50,000 HP. It's not rocket science. It could even be exactly the same as overland mob HP and damage. Just copy and paste the health and damage from a goblin outside the dungeon, put it on the goblin inside the dungeon. Doesn't seem that hard to me. The last consideration would be special mechanics that require groups to complete. So in Dire Frost Keep, there's that famous 2 pressure plates that you have to step on at the same time. You just change it down to 1 pressure plate and you'd be done. Also, a lot of dungeon bosses have some unavoidable CC effects that basically kill you outright if you don't have another player to help break free. Those effects would just have to be removed. But I think really that's about all it would take to make this work. Remove the loot, remove the experience from the zone, bring down enemy HP levels, damage, and special abilities, and that's it. It would not take much to make solo story modes a reality for group dungeons. And the thing is, ZeniMax is already heavily invested in solo players, and I think they realize the potential market here. I mean, look at what we're getting for ESO content in 2020. They've decided to re-release Skyrim as a playable zone, basically the most popular single-player Elder Scrolls game in history. Do you think a few Skyrim fans might like to be able to solo through those new dungeons? Maybe? And look at the new Antiquities system that's being worked on for the Skyrim chapter as well. A completely single-player, lore-focused system being added to an MMO? Yep, they're already doing it. So I think even for ZeniMax, this is a very clear direction moving forward. And how awesome would it be if they made this happen in 2020? Imagine if at the Q4 story DLC release at the end of this year, they said, oh, and hey, by the way, with our Q4 story DLC, we're also opening up a story mode for the Q1 and the Q3 dungeon DLCs. So if you missed those stories this year, you can now go back and finish them as many times as you want so that you can experience the full ESO Skyrim story from start to finish. You guys, I'm just printing money for ZeniMax here. Zos, if you'd like any more ideas, drop me an email. message me on Twitter. I'd be glad to help you guys make this work. Because like I said before, I think it will be good for the game in the long run, and I think it will make a lot of players happy. But that's all for today's video, folks. Of course, now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you think a solo story mode for dungeons is a good fit for ESO, or am I completely wrong here? Let me know in the comments section. As always, if you enjoyed the discussion today, don't forget to crush that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to HTM here on YouTube. And hey, even if story mode never happens, I have lots of solo builds and guides here on the channel that can help you experience ESO dungeon stories, even on normal or veteran mode, for the first time. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video.